Howdy hackers and welcome to another episode of FairLight TV. One of the peripherals used on the C64, which is sort of debated, there is even a thread on Reddit about it, is SD2IEC. The Reddit thread says something like, why does everybody hate SD2IEC? So I'm going to use this episode as a background to tell you a little bit of what it is and what it isn't, what works and what does not work. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I am going to dig into that for you. So over to the details on SD2IEC. All right, so SD2IEC is a development from MMC to IEC. Let's iron out those acronyms here. First of all, IEC is the serial bus on a Commodore 8-bit computer. It's there for +4, Commodore 16, C64, 128, even the old VIC-20, it has a serial bus. It's a compatible one. SD is Security Digital, I think it is. So it's one of those little kind of stamp-sized memory cards. Used to be in kilobytes, now is sort of almost in terabyte size. Convenient pocket-size things that you can carry around, and it's easy to swap. MMC, so the old one was multimedia card. That's also sort of a memory card form factor, not really in fashion anymore because SD is taken over the entire market here. So looking at this, so the whole point about this is that it's an open source project. The schematics for the board and the build is open source. The firmware is open source. Which means that anybody can take it and do whatever they want with it. So this company, tfw8b.com, they have taken this open source part and made a little cute installation of it. So it looks like a normal, like a mini version of the 1541. You see these little kind of rainbow stripes that you see on the 1541 disk drive. Very cute. But it is still sort of the open source thing. It's just that they have made the package for it. Okay, so this is just one packaging of the open source product then. Just for you to understand what it is and what it isn't, and what it can do and what it cannot do, I think it's important that we know what a disk drive is. So a disk drive is normally an entity that is connected to the serial bus, the IEC bus. It contains a 6502 CPU, and this is the 1541. I'm not saying this is true for every unit out there, especially, I don't know, the CMD hard disk and stuff like that. They are also connected using the serial bus, and I'm not saying they have a 6502 CPU. I have no idea what kind of processor runs inside of them, but they do have a processor because that is the way this protocol is designed. It's a talk between two computers. The 1541 also has 2 kilobytes of RAM from 0 to 800 hex, and 16 kilobytes of ROM from C1000 up until FFFF. And then it has 2 VIA chips. So in the 64 itself, there are CIA, but here they are VIA. So the 6526 is the chip that sits inside the 64, and these are sort of simpler things, I guess, 6522. And then you have the physical drive mechanisms, which is interfacing the physical diskette. Looking at SD2IEC, it emulates the serial bus. That's what it's doing. So it is interfacing the SD card. So talking to the SD card in one end and then talking to the serial bus in another end. You can send a number of commands to it for swapping D64 images and traversing the file system and stuff like that. But it is not a 1541. It doesn't support a number of the things a 1541 supports. So it emulates the serial bus protocol in relation to a disk image that sits on an SD card. It doesn't emulate a disk drive. It doesn't emulate the CPU. It doesn't emulate the ROM. It sort of re-implements a number of the procedures inside the ROM, but not all of them. It doesn't have support for like the drive RAM. So anything you're trying to do that is based on sending a little routine to the disk drive, taking over the communication on the serial bus, is not supported unless there is sort of a specific implementation of that mechanism. If you emulate fully, it would support everything. So regardless of the kind of turbo you are implementing, if you have proper emulation of the disk drive, you could send anything to the disk drive, emulate the disk drive RAM, execute it, and it would work. If emulation works, of course, but let's assume that emulation works. SD2IEC does not work like that. So there is no RAM you can send a routine to, and you cannot you can't basically do a memory write and a memory execute to the stuff you've sent to the disk drive, because again, there is no RAM, there is no code that would be allowed to execute because there is no emulation of the CPU. And also, if your routine would call the ROM, it also doesn't have the ROM. It doesn't need the ROM because it's emulating the protocol. It's not emulating the disk drive. So all sort of DOS-based loading and loaders, of course, that should work. As long as you use the normal like load command or the equivalent in machine code, that will work fine. But as soon as you start sending something to the RAM of the disk drive, trying to execute it, that doesn't work because that is not the intention of it. There is support for a number of other loaders. I think YiFiDOS is supported, and I guess Sailor has done this YaFiDOS, which is sort of a YiFiDOS where he built in additional things in order for supporting it properly. So I think a number of the variants of it could support something like YiFiDOS, but it doesn't support stuff like the Action Replay loader, for instance, which is one of the loaders that people use the most. So do I recommend this? I mean, it's a cheap option. If you're using like single file games or single file stuff or something which you know is supported by SD2IEC, then by all means, it's a cheap option. But if you want to have something that emulates the disk drive and where you can expect that the solution supports basically everything you would want to do as if it was a disk drive, then SD2IEC is not for you. Then you should have an Ultimate 64 an Ultimate 1541 or a Turbo Chameleon. One of those have a connection that makes them support a full disk drive. They are implementing full 6502 emulation, full emulation of all the chips, and full emulation of kind of accessing the D64 image or G64 image as if it was a disk. It's not just emulating the protocol. I hope this was clarifying what SD2IEC is and what it is not. And I hope you can also understand that from a programmer's perspective, if you want to make a demo or make a version of a game supporting a speed loader to make sure that the user experience is as good as it can be on any computer, then SD2IEC is causing problems because it doesn't support the use case basically. Anything that loads multiple files where you take over the serial bus for your own purpose won't work. And that is a nuance for anybody inside demo coding or cracking multi-file games. So I wouldn't recommend SD2IEC. I would recommend an Ultimate 1541 or a Turbo Chameleon. They are state-of-the-art products. They work super good, and they support the things you likely would like to need without restriction. SD2IEC does not. It supports some of the cases fairly okay, some of the cases not at all. I hope this was clarifying. I thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye-bye.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe. FairLight.